To the Reverend Mr. Thomas Wharton. Dear Sir, your notes upon my poet were very acceptable. I beg that you will be so kind as to continue your searches. It will be reputable to my work and suitable to your professorship to have something of yours in the notes. As you have given no direction about your name, I shall therefore put it. I wish your brother would take the same trouble. A commentary must arise from the fortuitous discoveries of many men in devious walks of literature. Some of your remarks are on plays already printed, but I propose to add an appendix of notes so that nothing comes too late. You give yourself too much uneasiness, dear sir, about the loss of the papers. These are receipts of Shakespeare the Warden lost. The loss is nothing if nobody has found them, nor even then, perhaps, if the numbers be known. You are not the only friend that has had the same mischance. You may repair your want out of stock, which is deposited with Mr. Allen of Magdalen Hall, or out of a parcel which I have just sent to Mr. Chambers, then at Lincoln College. Now Sir Robert Chambers, one of the judges of India, says Warden. For the use of any body that will be so kind as to want them. Mr. Langston's are well, and Miss Roberts, whom I have at last brought to speak upon the information which you gave me, that she has something to say. I am, etc., London, April 14, 1758, Sam Johnson. Letter to the same. Dear Sir, you will receive this by Mr. Baretti, a gentleman particularly entitled to the notice and kindness of the Professor of Poesy. He has time for such a short stay, and will be glad to have it filled up with as much as he can hear and see. In remembering another to your favor, I ought not to omit thanks for the kindness which you have shown to myself. Have you any more notes on Shakespeare? I shall be glad of them. I see your pupils sometimes. Mr. Langton, says Warden, as an aside. His mind is as exalted as his stature. I am half afraid of him, but he is no less amiable than formidable. He will, if the forwardness of his spring be not blasted, be a credit to you and to the university. He brings some of his plays, this Warden tells us, are part of the impression of the Shakespeare which Dr. Johnson conducted alone and published by subscription. This edition came out in 1765. He brings some of my plays with him, which he has my permission to show you, on condition you will hide them from everybody else. I am, dear sir, and etc., London, June 1st, 1758, Sam Johnson. Oh, now a letter to Bennet Langton, Esquire of Trinity College, Oxford, which is where I stayed. That's right, I'm a fancy, fancy man. Dear sir, though I might have expected to hear from you upon your entrance into a new state of life at a new place, yet recollecting, not without some degree of shame, that I owe you a letter upon an old account, I think it my part to write first. This, indeed, I do not only from the complacence, but from interest. For living on as in the old ways, I am very glad of a correspondent so capable as yourself to diversify the hours. You have at present too many novelties about you to need any help from me to drive along your time. I know not anything more pleasant or more instructive than to compare experience with expectation, or to register from time to time the difference between idea and reality. It is by this kind of observation that we grow daily less liable to be disappointed. You, who are very capable of anticipating futurity and raising phantoms before your own eyes, must often have imagined to yourself an academical life, and have conceived what would be the manners, the views, and the conversation of men devoted to letters. How they would choose their companions, how they would direct their studies, and how they would regulate their lives. Let me know what you expected and what you have found. At least record it to yourself before custom has reconciled you to the schemes before you, and the disparity of your discoveries to your hopes have vanished from your mind. It is a rule never to be forgotten that whatever strikes strongly should be described while the first impression remains fresh upon the mind. He's right there. I love, dear sir, to think on you, and therefore should willingly write more to you, but that the post will not now give me leave to do more than send my compliments to Mr. Warden, and tell you that I am, dear sir, most affectionately, your very humble servant. June 27, 1758, Sam Johnson. Now, a footnote here from a later editor, not Boswell, informs us that this is not actually from June 27, 1758. It's actually from 1799. So it's actually from June 28th, 1799. So there you have it. Dear sir, this letter is to Bennett Langston again, Esquire, at Langton near Spilsby, Lincolnshire. So he's at a different place now, I guess. He's in Lincolnshire, not in Oxford anymore. Dear sir, actually, I guess that other letter was from after this one, so it's all fucked up. Dear sir, I should be sorry to think that what engrosses the attention of my friend should have no part of mine. Your mind is now full of the fate of Dury, but his fate is past, and nothing remains but to try what reflection will suggest to mitigate the terrors of a violent death, which is more formidable at the first glance than our nearer and more steady view. Footnote here from Boswell. Major General Alexander Dury, of the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards, who fell in the gallant discharge of his duty near St. Cass in the well-known unfortunate expedition against France in 1758. His lady and Mr. Langston's mother were sisters. He left an only son, Lieutenant Colonel Dury, who has a company in the same regiment. Anyway, back to the letter. A violent death is never very painful. The only danger is lest it should be unprovided. But if a man can be supposed to make no provision for death in war, what can be the state that would have awakened him to the care of futurity? When would that man have prepared himself to die, who went to seek death without preparation? When then can be the reason why we lament more him that dies of a wound than him that dies of a fever? A man that languishes with disease ends his life with more pain, but with less virtue. He leaves no example to his friends, nor bequeaths any honor to his descendants. The only reason why we lament a soldier's death is that we think he might have lived longer. Yet this cause of grief is common to many other kinds of death, which are not so passionately bewailed. It's got a point there. The truth is that every death is violent, which is the effect of accident. Every death which is not gradually brought on by the miseries of age, or when life is extinguished for any other reason than that it is burned out. He that dies before 60, or of a cold or consumption, dies in reality by a violent death. Yet his death is borne with patience only because the cause of his untimely end is silent and invisible. Let us endeavor to see things as they are, and then inquire whether we ought to complain. Whether to see life as it is will give us much consolation, I know not. But the consolation which is drawn from truth, if any there be, is solid and durable. That which may be derived from error must be, like its original, fallacious and fugitive. I am, dear, dear sir, your most humble servant, September 21st, 1758, Sam Johnson. Well, that was a good letter. I like that one. Now we're up to 1759 when Johnson was 50. In 1759, he's over the hill now. In the month of January, Johnson's mother died at the great age of 90, an event which deeply affected him. Not that his mind had acquired no firmness by the contemplation of mortality, but that his reverential affection for her was not abated by years, as indeed he retained all his tender feelings even to the latest period of his life. I have been told that he regretted much his not having gone to visit his mother for several years previous to her death, but he was constantly engaged in literary labors which confined him to London, and though he had not the comfort of seeing his aged parent, he contributed liberally to her support. Soon after this event, he wrote his Rasselas, Prince of Abyssinia, concerning the publication of which Sir John Hawkins guessed vaguely and idly, instead of having taken the trouble to inform himself with authentic precision. Man, just give it up on this Hawkins guy. Not to trouble my readers with repetitive of the night's reveries, I am to mention that the late Mr. Strahan, the printer, told me that Johnson wrote it that with the profits he might defray the expense of his mother's funeral and pay some little debts which he had left. He told Sir Joshua Reynolds that he composed it in the evenings of 1 week, sent it to the press in portions as it was written, and had never since read it over. See post June 2nd, 1781. Finding it then accidentally in a chase with Mr. Boswell, he read it eagerly. This was doubtless long after his declaration to Sir Joshua Reynolds. Mr. Strahan, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Dodsley purchased it for £100, but afterwards paid him £25 more when it came to a second edition. Considering the large sums which have been received for compilations and works requiring not much more genius than compilations, we cannot but wonder at the very low price which he was content to receive for this admirable performance, which, though he had written nothing else, I'm going to translate this to modern English, which, if he had not written anything else, would have rendered his name immortal in the world of literature. None of his writings have been so extensively diffused over Europe, for it has been translated into most, if not all, of the modern languages. This tale, with all the charms of Oriental imagery, and all the force and beauty of which the English language is capable, leads us through the most important scenes of human life, and shows us that the stage of our being is full of vanity and vexation of spirit, to quote Ecclesiastes. To those who look no further than this present life, or who maintain that human nature has not fallen from the state in which it was created, the instruction of this sublime story will be of no avail. But they who think justly and feel with strong sensibility will listen with eagerness and admiration to its truth and wisdom. Voltaire's Candide, written to refute the system of optimism, which it has accomplished with brilliant success, is wonderfully similar in its plan and conduct to Johnson's Rasselas, insomuch that I have heard Johnson say that if they had not been published so closely one after the other that there was not time for imitation, it would have been in vain to deny that the scheme of that which came latest was taken from the other. Though the proposition illustrated by both these works was the same, namely, that in our present state there is more evil than good, the intention of the writers was very different. Voltaire, I am afraid, meant only by wanton profaneness to obtain a sportive victory over religion, and to discredit the belief of a superintending providence. Johnson meant, by showing the unsatisfactory nature of things temporal, to direct the hopes of man to things eternal. Rasselas, as was observed to me by a very accomplished lady, Mrs. Piozzi suggests, Mrs. Boswell, according to a later footnote, may be considered as a more enlarged and more deeply philosophical discourse in prose upon the intersecting truth, which in his vanity of human, upon the interesting truth, which in his vanity of human wishes he had so successfully enforced in verse. The fund of thinking which this work contains is such that almost every sentence of it may furnish a subject of long meditation. I am not satisfied if a year passes without my having read it through, and at every perusal my admiration of the mind which produced it is so highly raised that I can scarcely believe that I have the honor of enjoying the intimacy of such a man. I restrain myself from quoting passages from this excellent work, or even referring to them, because I should not know what to select, or rather what to omit. I shall, however, transcribe one, as it shows how well he could state the arguments of those who believe in the appearance of departed spirits, a doctrine which it is a mistake to suppose that he himself ever positively held. Even though, I feel like earlier here, Boswell did kind of say that, didn't he? Actually, there's a footnote here. See page 167. So maybe they're talking about what I'm referring to, which is when I believe Boswell did say that. I'm just going to peek in here. Yeah, I think, it is actually pointing that part. So I'm smarter than you think. I've been picking up some stuff in here. Anyway, here is this quoted part. If all your fear to be of apparitions, said the prince, I will promise you safety. There is no danger from the dead. He that is once buried will be seen no more. That the dead are seen no more, said Imlac, I will not undertake to maintain against the concurrent and unvaried testimony of all ages and of all nations. There is no people, rude or learned, among whom apparitions of the dead are not related and believed. This opinion, which prevails as far as human nature is diffused, could become universal only by its truth. Those that never heard of one another would not have agreed in a tale which nothing but experience can make credible. That it is doubted by single cavaliers can very little weaken the general evidence. And some who deny it with their tongues confess it by their fears. End of quoted part. I'm kind of getting into that. That was nicely written. Kind of spooky. Anyway, notwithstanding my high admiration of Rasselas, I will not maintain that the morbid melancholy in Johnson's constitution may not, perhaps, have made life appear to him more insipid and unhappy than it generally is. For I am sure that he had less enjoyment from it than I have. Yet, whatever additional shade his own particular sensations may have thrown on his representation of life, that's kind of like, we use that now, right? What shade he drew on it, right? That's kind of entered the lexicon of our vernacular, if I may be so bold. Anyway. Attentive observation and close inquiry have convinced me that there is too much of reality in the gloomy picture. The truth, however, is that we judge of the happiness and misery of life differently at different times, according to the state of our changeable frame. So says Captain Obvious. I always remember a remark made to me by a Turkish lady. Later footnote says, Mele Imtula, Boswell's Letters, page 51. Educated in France. And she said in French, which I will read, and I don't think there's a translation, but maybe there is. Ma foi, monsieur, notre bonheur dépend de la façon que notre sang circule. This have I learned from a pretty hard course of experience, and would, from sincere benevolence, impress upon all who honor this book with a perusal, that until a steady conviction is obtained that the present life is an imperfect state, and only a passage to a better, if we comply with the divine scheme of progressive improvement. And also that it is a part of the mysterious plan of Providence that intellectual beings must be made perfect through suffering. There will be a continual recurrence of disappointment and uneasiness. But if we walk with hope in the midday sun of revelation, our temper and disposition will be such that the comforts and enjoyments in our way will be relished, while we patiently support the inconveniences and pains. After much speculation and various reasonings, I acknowledge myself convinced of the truth of Voltaire's conclusion, Après tout, c'est un monde passable. But we must not think too deeply. Where ignorance is bliss, till folly to be wise. I said that wrong. Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Is, in many respects, more than poetically just. Let us cultivate, under the command of good principles, la théorie des sensations agréables, and, as Mr. Burke once admitted, and once admirably consoled a grave and anxious gentleman, live pleasant. All right, so I'm going to look up these French translations, and I'll post them in my description of this, I guess. Well, until next time, I'll be back with my dinner with Andre, my dinner with Johnson here. Bye from Boswell.